At the end of the 19th century, a shipwreck was discovered in a field near Tønsberg in Norway, and these are the bits that are left from it that were dug up in the 1970s. What's special about this ship is that because it was a shipwreck, it hasn't been squashed flat, and so the form of the hull is really clear, which makes it a really good basis for making a copy. And here we are on board the first copy of Kloster ship that was made. This is called Saga Farman, and this is a voyage between Norway and Denmark that my son went on, so thanks to him for this footage. This kind of vessel is called a nar in Norwegian, which is a cargo ship, cargo vessel, or trading ship. So the people that were responsible for building this ship have helped us build the ship that I've been helping to build. When I started volunteering on this project, this is how it looked. I was fascinated about this project happening. This is an inland area, so to be building a big boat like this is very unusual. So needless to say, I had a very strong urge to be involved. This is a family photograph, and the zoom in is going to my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, who were boat builders in Cornwall. So I think it was a call from the blood. The piece of wood for the keel came from a forest in Norway, but most of the strakes, one of these pieces here that are being prepared, came from Denmark. They're building a steamer by the looks of it. That is actually Jan. He's the master boat builder who built Saga Farman, or led the team, and carrying the board, Axel, his apprentice. Now we have had drawings. We got a set of drawings that came from Saga Farman, and we have been using those as reference, but the boat that we've built is slightly different. It has some hybridizations because its intended use is as a school ship, so there'll be rowing. So it doesn't have such high walls as this ship, and instead of having those rowlocks on the top for the oars, it has holes in the actual side of the ship. There are some other slight differences in the shape of the ship. I can try and go into some detail about that later. But my point that I was going to make was that although we have drawings, most of the details of all of these parts have been verbally described to us rather than any kind of detailed drawings. So as a craftsman, to come and help work on a project like this, there's quite a big challenge of communication. To be able to take a verbal description of what you're going to build, what you're going to produce, and then there's a little bit of backwards and forwards as the master builder comes and assesses the work that's been done and recommends different changes. Another interesting aspect is the level of authenticity. I know that people coming to the channel to watch videos of someone building a Viking ship very often really interested in how authentic it is, how authentic the methods are. And as far as I can tell, and from my experience of working with this, is that it's really difficult to tell to what extent we're being authentic to how the Vikings would have built a ship, because we don't have very much of the old archaeological evidence. But we do have a living tradition of building ships which are incredibly like Viking ships. So although there's no evidence of the masts and the rigging, it really does seem quite reasonable to assume that quite a lot of the good ideas are still living, still part of a living tradition. And just in the same way as I experience restoring the old buildings, we do use modern tools, cutting tools like the chainsaw you just saw in the last clip. But at the same time, we also still have a lot of the use of the hand tools, and being able to use the hand tools well is just a practicality. Truly, it is quicker to use hand tools in quite a lot of situations, and especially if you're trying to go for a hand finish, then very often it just makes sense to use them. So even if I were making a modern boat, it might be that I would use some hand tools. But at the same time, if I can see a way of doing a process faster with a machine tool, it doesn't seem any problem to me to just use it. And in the recent months, I've been paid to do some of this work, and I don't see any reason whatsoever to waste time with hand tools when I'm being paid to to bring forward the production faster. It's just not an issue of authenticity to me. What's important here is the understanding and the processes, the decision making about how things should be formed, what they should look like and how they should function. That's the bit that we're trying to preserve, not the hundreds and hundreds of hours of using an axe to cut out the piece of wood. Obviously that skill is really good to have to develop and hone that skill, but only very few people have the time for that, because it really does take hundreds of hours to get good. Here's axial chopping, and he's fantastic. It's hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice have brought him to that state. So when people come and volunteer with low amount of experience with the hand tools, it's just not feasible for them to be doing this really very, very precise work with an axe. We are then left with the dilemma of the compromise of speeding some aspects up by using fast cutting electric tools or motor powered tools. I just, for myself, with all of this experience working with restoring old buildings and doing this project, building this boat, it just simply isn't an issue for me. I don't think it's inauthentic to mix up the tools a little bit. Another thing to bear in mind is that many of the tools that we're using that are modern are just simply modern versions of things which are ancient in origin. The vice clamps, the ratchet straps. The ratchet strap can be placed by a Spanish windlass. The clamps can be made from wood, and we do use some authentic ones that are wooden. It's just for me, it's not an issue. There are other things I can think of as well. Examples like using the spirit level. Of course, they used a lod line, a plumb line. So it's the same function. Compasses as well, using dividers or compasses. They're ancient tools. There's no dilemma or doubt in my mind that it's perfectly authentic to use these things. And I feel quite strongly that to work in a way that is clearly impractical is it in itself inauthentic. Because if there's one thing I've learnt about these handwork traditions, is that they are just through and through based on practical and sensible decision making. I suppose it's not a very romantic view, so I apologise for those of you who desperately need an antidote to the modern way of life and want to live a dream of reenactment. This sadly is not it, but the reenactment is fantasy really. It's a lot of speculation in the way that things are reenacted anyway. So I think that preserving a living tradition in this way, even if it's part old, part new. It's perfectly worthy and very, very good. I think it is very good, really. And we do live quite far north here, and we are in the tail end of an ice age, so big oak is not something that we have a great deal of here. They grow very slowly in this cold climate, and a lot of the evidence seems to suggest that the weather was quite a lot warmer 1,000 years ago, and oak was more abundant at that time than it is now, and it could be for very many reasons. So we have a responsibility to use these materials really well. Now, here is some footage of choosing an oak tree, and this tree has been condemned. So it's been donated to us, and it was going to be taken down anyway. This footage shows forestry, and the oak is protected in Norway. You can't just cut them down. But these ones that are close to the edge of roads and to the edge of fields, they can be taken down legally because they can be considered to interfere with the running of the farms. So there's no protection on those. And because we're only interested in this curved parts, the curved parts of the wood, it's even less of an issue because that isn't part of the production yield traditionally. So it doesn't affect the farmer's income because they can still cut up the main part of the wood and use it as the products that they would do. So instead of these curved pieces being just kind of firewood or thrown away completely, rotting away to nothing, it's giving them a new lease of life. Another aspect of using machine tools such as chainsaws and sawmills to help speed along the work is to do with conservation. It might very well make the process faster, but you should also consider that it makes the yield from each tree much larger. We use fewer trees because we're getting more pieces of usable material from each one. And this again I also understand from experience because I've been to visit the Sutton Hoo project where things have been done just with axes. All of the trees have been split and the boards have been hewn rather than cut with chainsaw mills. And the consumption of trees to build that boat is much larger. We just don't have that luxury here in Scandinavia. There just simply aren't enough trees to support a new movement of boat building like this. So there are those considerations to make, and to ignore the real world consequences of cutting down lots of oak trees to build these boats for the sake of some kind of fantastical reinvention of the past is it's just it goes a bit too far for me. It's overly romantic. All of the questions of the sustainability of a new tradition of boat building like this, or the re-examination of previous boat traditions, they are ethical. It's an ethical issue, and we really do have to strive for it to be a sustainable practice. And that's perfectly possible, but we can't be building a great many of these without depleting supplies of timber because the trees, they just take too long to grow. If these boats were just made out of spruce or pine, none of this would be an issue because we have plenty of sustainable forest for those tree sorts. It's just the deciduous trees that are more seldom here in Scandinavia. And using wood as a sustainable product is all to do with the correct harvesting in relation to the correct kind of planting. It's just a decision-making process, and humans are perfectly capable of stewarding nature in this way, and we have done for centuries before.
Det er bra.
God venn av meg.
Det ser bra ut, det.
Det er siste sjanse for den å se båten
I huset, ja.
er jo tatt.
Med dus lys.
Veldig bra. Rolig. Det er mye skip i veien her. Nei, det vet vi.